Right, we've got someone from the Netherlands as well.
Amazing. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, goedemorgen, namaste. Magandang hapon to everybody who's joining us from all over the world today. Thank you so much for spending time with us at our OutSystems User Group Australia East Coast session. And today we have a very special session on safeguarding your OutSystems apps and discussing security best practices. And we are joined by three amazing guys here, and we have a full packed agenda for you this morning. And Marge, do you want to tell us what we can expect today?
Right. All right. So I'm Margaret or Marge. I will be your co-host today with Julia. And we've done our welcoming, we've done intros. So let me introduce to you our speakers for tonight or today. So first up, we've got Hanu Kotse. He's an OutSystems MVP and a senior technical lead at Phoenix DX. And he will provide us with some expert advice or insights on managing secure permissions using an external authorization service. Next up is we have Stuart Harris, not Harris, who is an OutSystems champion and a dad joke expert based in Melbourne, Australia. And he will discuss how to pass penetration tests using OWASP principles. And rounding up our lineup is our very talented Bhavya Shah, who is a technical lead and 2IC from Phoenix DX as well, who will cover content security policy. At the end of these presentations, we will have a Q&A. And after the Q&A, we'll have our very ever fun and exciting Kahoot game, where the top 3 winners will get a swag gift from OutSystems, just like this t-shirt. Can't see it. Yeah. So, Julia?
Amazing. Thank you, Marge. Yes. Just a little housekeeping for everybody. We'd love this to be as engaging as possible. And of course, if you can, please turn your cameras on. We'd love to see, your reactions as a speaker. I think it also helps to see that, you're talking to people and that they agree with you or they disagree with you. This is an open forum. If you have any questions or comments, please, you can put them in at any stage by typing them in the chat window on your mobile and your PC. You should be able to see the symbol there. And during the presentations, we'd like to ask everybody to please mute their microphones. If you accidentally unmute, that's fine. Just, please mute your mic. And yeah, if you need to answer the call of nature, I'm sure the toilets are there where you are. I'm sure they're conveniently located where you are and should be easy to access. And if you miss any part of this session because of that, don't worry, we are recording this and we're posting it on YouTube as soon as it ends. So without further ado, let's call our first speaker, Mr. Hanno. Take it away.
Thank you. Hello. Goeiedag allemaal. Good day, everyone. Take a moment to share a part of my screen, one of my windows. Please bear with me. I've got a single monitor set up today, which isn't ideal, but I'll try and make the best of it. Right, so as that's coming up, today I'll be talking a little bit about fine-grained permissions using an external authorization service. So in full transparency, I had grand plans to have a nice working demo contracting OutSystems built versus integrating external services. And as I was preparing the presentation and my slides and working through implementing this, I learned quite a few lessons, and that before committing to such a goal, make sure you understand what you're getting into. So I'm hoping to share some of those learnings along the way as well. So what I'll do today is give you some boring stuff to work through to help you understand what this is about. And then I'll do a short code walkthrough. And as I said, unfortunately, not a working demo today, but hoping to build that out into a working demo over time, and definitely sharing that with the community at some point. Right. So, what is fine-grained permissions or authorization? It is a process that involves granting or limiting access to specific resources or actions based on detailed criteria. I mean, that's a bit vague, but what that means or what that helps you achieve is improved security. Why? Because you have a high level of control in determining what a user can or cannot do. You also have more nuanced authorization, especially where you get into more complex systems, thinking enterprise level. Examples of that is Google, Netflix, Microsoft, really big systems, and especially where all those systems need to work together with a central authorization service, for lack of a better term. And then a lot of the decisions could be data driven as well. So as soon as you get into those big ecosystems, a lot of your decision making authorization rules start to work on the data that you have available. And we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. So two things to take note of here. One is conditions or attributes. So think about user's attributes, name, surname, age, region, etc. And then also relationships. I'll touch on that a bit more as well as I go through this. Right, moving on. So the big benefits of fine-grained authorization, or FGA, which is the acronym. We get increased precision. So I'll try not read the exact text there, but essentially you can consider multiple things at the same time. So attributes, conditions, relationships, and that allows you to really narrow down what you or how you give a user permissions, who can do what. Flexibility, it's fairly flexible and easy to adapt to business changes, especially in complex scenarios. If you look into the literature a bit, into the blogs and the case studies, it becomes really apparent how using FGA is preferable to implementing all of this in code, and especially when it comes to when you need to implement changes. And the other part of that is dynamic access policies. So dynamic meaning configurable by end users. So yeah, sure, we can build all of this pretty easily in code, but if you want to give the end users some control over this, it becomes tricky if it's in code. And then again, along those lines, enhanced security, really detailed access control. You start approaching this with the least privilege mindset almost, where you only see what you're allowed to see, and your risk of having users that have too many permissions or too broad a permission is reduced a lot by using this approach. And then there's a claim of better user experience because we control the access so well. We get a smoother experience where users, don't see what they don't need to see, or they're very clear on what the boundaries are of their access. There's no, gray area where perhaps you traditionally only have a role and there's a lot of things happening on the screen. Because you get there, you may think you should be able to do all of that. Whereas with FGA, you're much more in control of what you can do in each part of that screen. Can I build this in OutSystems? Right, so yeah, I was super optimistic, as I mentioned, and my initial answer was yes. You definitely can. And that's probably one of the things I learned as well, is that not everything can and should be built in OutSystems. And it may become clear as we go through this a little bit. So I said, perhaps a variation of it you can build in OutSystems, and that's a scaled down version of it. And hopefully it becomes a little bit clearer why that is. But I strongly encourage, if you're interested in this topic, to do a little bit of research on it and see why it won't necessarily be the best approach to build it in OutSystems. So the next question then is, should I build this in OutSystems or rather use an external service? Again, it depends. And why does it depend? So it depends on use case complexity. So complex use cases, in my opinion, based on the research, not to be built in OutSystems, definitely use an external service. And we'll see as I talk through this why. So timelines and budgets, always a concern, always a consideration. So do you have the time to build it? Do you have the money to build it? Is an external perhaps cheaper to consider in terms of time to value? Perhaps the subscription service is not that expensive compared to the time it'll take you to build it in OutSystems or in another system. Scalability, that's a big one. I initially didn't have this on here, but this is always a true aspect in I think any system we build, and especially with this permissioning system. And I'll pause on this one a bit. So with scalability, the big thing here that I realized or learned was that when we start to talk about an external authorization service, a lot of use cases that show up in the literature is it's a decentralized system that you use for authorization. And I can relate to a specific use case with one of the projects I worked on. We have a lot of data in OutSystems, but other systems also need to authorize against that data. So is OutSystems the best place for that to live? Initially, maybe yes, but as we mature in our development, as we grow our product, it may no longer be the case. And then, the decision making around the rules, also becomes challenging in terms of resources, like physical computer resources, or virtual resources. And that's where the scalability part comes in. You need a little bit more control, and I think we are all familiar with the OutSystems cloud hosting, that it's not necessarily that flexible in terms of how we can manage that scalability. Yes, it's vertically scalable. Yes, it's horizontally scalable. But if we look again at the use cases for the decentralized or FGA authorization, it may not be the best approach. Another consideration is your resource skill set. It's a complex domain when you start looking into external authorization. So you need to ask the question, do I have the skills to build it locally, build it in OutSystems? And then further to that, maintainability, will those resources stick around? Or if they move on, will I be able to replace them and maintain my complex authorization system? So with those two in mind, you may venture a preference to an external system where all of that is taken care of or managed at least by an external party. And then another requirement is governance requirements. So when we start working with authentication and authorization in this case, there's usually a lot of governance requirements that you need to satisfy. And this again it's not impossible within OutSystems. The platform does provide a lot of compliance in this regard, but when you start building your own yes/no system for users, you need to test, validate, prove that it's not breakable or hackable. And then again, considering an external service, this may already be taken care of for you. Right, so a lot of rambling, so I'll try and dive a little bit deeper into how FGA works. So you may want to pay attention for the good questions from this point on, if I'm allowed to give any tips. Right, so if you remember on one of the earlier slides, I mentioned conditions or attributes. So you can use attributes for access control. We use languages like AWS Cedar, Open Policy Agent, or Alpha. To be honest, I've never heard of these before the last 3-4 months. but it's really interesting to learn about them. And a lot of these are just, you know, a way to configure what we call a policy. So your policy language. So how do you set up your access in terms of a policy? So you could liken it to JSON. It's very similar structure. The second type is relationship. So they're not the same. They're quite different. And I'll dive into that a little bit soon. So with relationship-based, we have an assumption that all the data in our database is related in some way. And because of that relationship, we can build rules around that and make a decision on whether something is allowed or not. How do we model that relationship? We use a graph. If you're not familiar with graphs, there are two key concepts here. One is nodes, that essentially relates to data entities, and then edges, that relates to the relationships between those entities or the data within those entities. Right. An example of relationship-based authentication is OpenFGA. It's more a platform than a language, but it is a bit of a gray area. But yeah, definitely research that a bit more if you're interested. Right, so I mentioned policies. So we implement policies for authorization using one or more of these tools above. And when you start looking into this a bit more, you'll see there are a few service providers that actually bring some of this together. So how do I create policies? There's I believe this is open source, open policy administration layer, which allows us to combine relationships and conditions in one authorization service. So where you have these two distinct types, they can now be combined into a service. And you can use the OPAL standard, not to be confused with the Australian travel cards in New South Wales. But you can use this to set up your policies and then query those policies through that service to make decisions on who can do what. Or you can use a tool like Permanent.io. This is not a sponsored talk. It's just a service that I used recently. And what is nice about Permit.io, they explain why they do what they do, where they got their rationale from. They also provide a GUI and a lot of APIs to help you manage your policies, which make it a lot easier. So you don't actually have to write the code. So a low-code approach to managing permissions or policies. Right. So advantages and challenges. This is the one slide I didn't put animations on. The main advantage of using conditions is that we can model stateless authorization systems. So stateless is important when we talk about distributed, processing, different disconnected systems trying to authorize against the same data, but they don't all have the same session or state. So that is a one good advantage. The downside of that is and this is with the conditions, the attributes part. The downside is that we need to maintain the data consistency. So as the data changes, we need to push those updates. We make the decision where the decision on our policies are made. So as your system then grows, it becomes less efficient, to keep that data up to date. So when you start running into that limitation, that's where relationship-based authentication can assist you. And you may not be able to evaluate the conditions directly because of data not syncing fast enough, latency, network latency. So in that instance, we can use implicit grants, and that's where the permissions come in. So we set up those relationships, using the APIs and things, and then we just query our authorization service based on that relationship to say yes or no. I've got a little example later on. Hopefully that makes more sense. I know this is a lot of information. First time it broke my brain, but the more I read about it, the better I'm able to explain it. So hopefully I'm doing a fairly good job. Right. So then relationships also have limitations, particularly regarding time and complexity. So it takes time to analyze the relationships in the graph. And the more complex it gets, the longer that takes. So it can also become a really time-consuming thing. And this is one of the key areas where it may not make sense to build it directly in OutSystems, just because of how resource intensive it is. But again, if a use case is not that complex, it may be a good approach to build it inside there. Right. So here's an example in Permit.io. This is what a typical code approach would look like. So you would get all the information that you need to make a decision. You would have an if statement, and that's your rule that you implement there. If all of these conditions are satisfied, then a user is permitted to view a document. You'll see we've got three entities there that we query: the user, document, document types, but we're also querying an external service, the Stripe service, to see if this is actually a paid-up user. With Permit.io, which encapsulates all of the policies for us, our code reduces down to, am I allowed to do this? This is my user. This is my action I'm trying to do, which is view the document. Well, sorry, it's trying to do a view action, and the object or the resource I'm trying to do that on is a document. So that request goes to my authorization service. My authorization service does its fancy business logic based on the relationships or the attributes that we set up, and it comes back with a response of yes or no, as simple as that. So your code becomes a lot less because you manage the decision making somewhere else. Right, so if you give me a second, I'll stop sharing and quickly do a code walkthrough in ODC Studio, where I tried to implement this. May have bitten off a bit more than I can chew, as I mentioned, but again, interesting learnings. Right, I hope that comes up. Please let me know if it's not. Okay, I can see it.
You can see it okay.
Cool, thanks, Stuart. All right, so considering the approach we take or should take with ODC in terms of architecture, I've created a library that will house or contain my integration to my API. I've got two APIs here, and I'll quickly talk to those. Permit here is how I manage my policies. So I can create some users, I can create some resources, and I can create some relationships. And this will link up to my management screens within my application. So typically, if I just jump in here, I had let's say an employee screen. So I can create an employee. So if I had an employee on my save action, I'll typically call the create user within Permit. An employee could also be a resource. So, use the employee as a resource to link to my policy. The other API I have here is the one that's, what we're going to use runtime as well, but this is the allowed API. So with this API, we pass in a fairly simple request where we have the user, we have the action, and we have the resource on which we want to execute the action. And how do we distinguish between all of these? We use keys, so GUIDs are preferable. The authorization service also supports multi-tenancy, but it's a simple, use a wrapper action for access. So I named it access. My result is allowed, and wherever I want to verify that someone has access, I'll just drop this server action, or query the server action and pass the context of what I'm trying to authorize against. So the user, am I trying to view something? Am I trying to create something? Am I trying to edit something? Or just reading something? And then we've got the resource type again and the key for that context. So it's fairly straightforward. So I think what's good about this is it's a server action. What's bad about it is it's a server action. It does help, limit some of the security challenges that come with client-side code. But the question that I'm sure everyone has is, what's the performance and how does performance impact this? So what I don't show you here today is these are two distinct services. Yes, they're two APIs, but they're also two distinct services within the internet or within the cloud. So Permit is hosted by Permit.io. They've got a nice user interface and where you can manage your policies. And once that's done, where do your decision queries go? That goes to the PDP. So this is a policy decision point. And this is typically hosted as a container, and it should be hosted as close as possible to your front-end server. Within the OutSystems ecosystem, we can't install any additional containers or applications on the web servers. So one there is to host it perhaps in AWS, and then set up a virtual private gateway and link up the two networks. When I say host the PDP in AWS, host it as close as possible to the region or data center where your OutSystems instance is installed. Or hosted rather. And you get really low response times. It's sub 100 milliseconds, which is good for the implementation that we did. A couple of thousand users, it's not too bad. I think as we scale, you may look at some of the scenarios that come up or use cases that come up in the literature around these authorization implementations, where you start load balancing between policy decision points. If you take this to an extreme example, Netflix, Google. So interesting, all of this is based on Google Zanzibar. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but that's the authorization system that Google implements for their services, Google Drive, Gmail, etc. They have about 2 trillion records, I believe, that they need to make decisions against. And how they got around that is to use data sharding. So they know what data needs to live where over the globe, and they selectively sync the data there. So because this is an externally hosted service, yes, network latency, scalability does become a challenge. All right. I'm fully aware that's a lot of information, probably a lot of new information. I've noticed some familiar faces in the audience that may know what I'm talking about. Hopefully, I did it justice. And yeah, I believe that's my demo. I'll definitely work on building this out a bit more and share it with the community when it's in a better space, better example for you to reference. Thank you for listening. Over to you, Marge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hanno. And as a reminder for everybody, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, please. And that's from Hanno. Now let's welcome our next speaker, OutSystems champion, Mr. Stuart Harris. He gave a great speech. He gave a great session at the One conference. I was very lucky to see that, of course, like a very shameless plug there, Stu. But yes, go ahead.
Put the mic on, yes. Thanks, Julia, that was awesome. Hanno, that was really interesting. Thank you so much for doing that. That hasn't been on my radar at all. But I'm really going to look into that now. So that's it. Thanks. That's the end of my talk. All right. So I'm talking about OWASP Top 10 and how to pass your penetration tests. And I'm Stuart. Hi. So this is what we're going to talk about. Instead of wasting time here, I'm actually just going to move on, start doing it. Right, so penetration tests. If you don't know what they are, sometimes we call them pen tests. It's basically someone's going to simulate a cyber attack on your application. Generally, we'll organise that, before we release the software, probably the best time to do it, maybe annually or after we've made some changes to it. And the penetration testers, generally that's a separate company or a separate team, separate group of people. They'll use industry standard testing guides. Most of the time, I've noticed they use the OWASP testing guide or the NIST, the American, what is it? National Institute of Security and Technology or something. Anyway, some American standard. And they'll give you a vulnerability report, and then you have to basically fix the things. Or you talk to the client, decide, what are we going to fix? What's important? And it'll all be arranged in, high impact, medium impact, low impact. Often you might actually let a few of the low impact ones go. I keep on looking over there because that's where I've got the screen. Anyway, so just in case you're wondering, you probably weren't. So OWASP is Open Worldwide Application Security Project. So it's not a game like the image I've got there, but it's an open source project. It's been running for quite a long time now, maybe 20 years. And they periodically review what's going on in web development and put together the top 10 of the things that you really need to focus on. So the last one was in 2021. So we're due for a new one. I think it's 2025, or it might even be 2024, but this is still the current one. The previous one was 2016. Now, I'm not going to read through all of the things, but I'm going to just have a look at the first one and give you an idea of the sort of information that's in each of these items. I'll look at the camera instead of over there. How about that? Well, here is the OWASP page. So you go to OWASP Top 10, and then it lists all of the things. In each of these, this is kind of showing the mapping. Oh, 2017, not 16. There you go. And so this is the first one, broken access control. So that's essentially where you're letting people access things they shouldn't access. So maybe you haven't done your fine-grained permissions properly or at all, or you're just letting users access admin when they're not allowed to, or you're making something public when you shouldn't. Now, it generally has an overview and a description of what exactly it is, which I've just poorly attempted to summarize for you there. Then how to prevent it, and then some examples, and then a whole bunch of references. Now, an interesting thing is that they have these, what are they? CWEs, common something. What is it? Stands for common something. Here's common weakness enumerations. Now, this broken access control is a whole bunch of different issues that you might find. Look at the camera. And these are the issues. So in different years, they'll actually have a slightly different grouping. So for the 2021 year, we'll see that there's a few new ones, but there might be only a couple of new things here, but then we've kind of grouped it with this lot as well, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So what does a CWE look like? You notice the user interface gets worse and worse as we go down. Just ignore that. So here's one, storing passwords in a recoverable format. And that has, you know, lots more detail, examples about it. And memberships, there we go. This is in the OWASP top 10 in the insecure design area. Right, so now we haven't got time for me to read out all of this stuff, and who wants to listen to that anyway? But all of the information is there for a developer, for a QA, for anyone who wants to know about security. All the information's there for you. Right, so what is the current top 10? So briefly, broken access control, where you're letting people access things they're not allowed to. Cryptographic failures, so that might mean people can access your site without using HTTPS. Or even, remember HTTPS is just HTTP plus TLS, transport layer security. Now, in recent years, well, maybe a bit more than recent, there've been some new versions of TLS, and so no one should be using version 1 anymore. So, so you could be using an older version or a less secure version of cryptography. Injection. I hope most of you know what. Maybe I'll just show the slideshow. I hope everyone knows what injection is. That's when we're talking about SQL injection. So where you've got some input from a user, and it can actually run a database command when you just try and insert it into the database. Insecure design, that's a new one. And what that one's about is that most of these are about implementation, but the design's about, well, the design, but it means that you could implement that perfectly, but the design still makes it insecure. For example, the design might have no encryption for passwords, or but if you implement that perfectly, it's still not secure because you haven't encrypted them. Then the security misconfiguration, essentially you might not have switched things on, or you might be using default passwords for the platform, which I don't think you can do with OutSystems anymore. There used to be a default password, but that shows how old I am. It might be about 4 or 5 years ago, I think that disappeared. Vulnerable and outdated components. So maybe an old version of jQuery. One of the things that sometimes comes up in pen tests is telling us that OutSystems is using an insecure or a version of jQuery that's got security issues. However, OutSystems patches their version of jQuery. So generally you have to find the documentation and explain that to the pen testers to get them to mark that one as sorted. Authentication failures. So maybe you're not storing passwords encrypted, or you're storing them in a way that can, their encryption is reversible, or maybe you're storing them in plain text, God knows. Then software and data integrity failures. That one's more about if you're using external components that are maybe not secure, or you're not reviewing them, or they can include other things that are not secure without you really knowing about it. And often that applies to automated deployment frameworks, which OutSystems does for us. So it's fine. Security logging and monitoring failures. Maybe you're logging sensitive information, or you're not logging enough information. You're not logging when there's security issues. And server-side request forgery. This is where, this is a new one, and it's happening more often. They're not really seeing it in the wild so much, but in their last survey, there was a lot of concern about it. And what it is when a user provides a URL to the application and that URL is not validated, and then it does something malicious. Okay, so that's the top 10. So that was, a race through those. Now, these are the ones that OutSystems really helps us with. It doesn't do everything, all of this stuff. It doesn't completely cover all of it for us, but it helps out significantly. And in some of them, it just completely covers it for us. So what does it do? So authentication, although if you want to use MFA, you need to build that yourself. Although with ODC, or even with OutSystems 11, you can integrate to another identity provider that will do it for you. Cross-site request forgery, it's got all the protections in there, as well as for cross-site scripting. The protections are very similar for those. Injection, we don't really need to worry about injection too much, but we do need to worry about it a little bit when we do specific things like use advanced SQL. We also do need to validate our inputs. OutSystems does automated platform updates for us. OutSystems component updates, it does for us. It notifies us with Forge component updates. So, and it also does platform, so operating system level updates automatically for us. Security logging, all the logging frameworks are there. You do need to use them, but for the platform level stuff, that all gets logged. Cryptography is handled for us, and monitoring. There is a CSIRT team. So there's a team that actually monitors all of the OutSystems cloud infrastructures. If you use Sentry, you get a dedicated team. But even if you're not using Sentry, there's still a team monitoring your environments for you. How's that? So that's what OutSystems does for us. How are we going? Have to hurry up. So cross-site request forgery. So here's just one sort of attack, which is a pretty common one that we need to protect for. So first of all, the user is, this is the place where I just pinched that image from, by the way, because I didn't want to draw it myself. So the user's already authorized. So they're already logged into the website. An attacker sends our user a malicious link that is a link to the application that does something in the application. The user clicks on it. Maybe it's some sort of clickbait, but it actually goes to their browser, into their app, and then it takes some action that buys something or causes something to happen that the attacker wants to happen. That's probably not good for the user. So that can just be a hyperlink. Nowadays, though, applications are pretty good at making sure that things can only happen with a post request instead of a get, and all clicking on a link can do is a get. But what it could do is take you to a website that has a form that maybe you just enter some information in, click a button, and then that can then maybe post to your application, if your application isn't preventing that. OutSystems prevents this for us. Okay, cross-site request forgery, or CSRF or XSRF. Now, these are the things that we have to do. It's quite a lot, really. Well, a lot of it's just switching things on. So we need to enable HSTS, enable content security. If we want to do multi-factor authentication, as I mentioned before, we really need to use an external authentication service. We need to decide on our password complexity. There's some helpers in ODC for that, though, so that's improving. We need to do virus scanning for uploaded files, so we need to set that in place. And in terms of OutSystems has all of the framework for setting permissions, but we need to use them. And we need to make sure that users can access only what they're allowed to access. So using the least privilege principle. Now, I'm going to just race through this and show you a quick demo. But we need to restrict retrieval of data, do server-side authorization checks. So just not just in the client. We need to sanitize our inputs in forms, SQL, APIs, and uploads. Make sure your APIs are authenticated. It's kind of obvious. And we're responsible for application event logging. So the system won't do application events for us, but the system will log system tasks. All right. So I'll just go quickly past this again. So what not to do: don't work around the existing security or ignore security warnings. Don't build your own authentication. Don't use GUIDs for access keys, although the reason for that is the cryptography behind GUIDs is generally not at an appropriate level. Nowadays it probably is actually. Don't write sensitive data to logs, and don't use client-side visibility to restrict access on its own. Or leave your test pages in production. Okay, so let's have a quick look at this demo. Now, what we've got here is we've got a sample application that's displaying a quote. But if I log in as a broker, if I log in as a broker, I'm not allowed to see this premium section here. So I'll log out and let's log in as, oh no, this is a broker. So, and we'll go to a quote. Now, they can't see the premium section. However, this is only done in the client. So if I load that page again and have a look at the data that's been sent to the browser, it's sent all the premium data. So in our, here's our display quote page. We're just getting the premium regardless whoever's accessing this page. So what we really need to be doing, well, first off, the reason that's a problem is we've got multiple different user types using this page. If it was only one user type, we wouldn't really have a problem. We could just do it like we're doing it. But because we've got multiple user types whose experience needs to be different, using an aggregate directly on a page, that is not okay, because that gives anyone who can access that page access to that data. What we need to be doing is putting it behind a data action and then deciding whether or not to return that data. So, and then if you're not allowed to get that data, you can return the structure with just no data in it. So that's what we need to be doing. Now, I've gone over time. I was just going to show you another example of so here's a customer logging on, and they've been redirected to their customer page. Now, another attack you need to prevent is they're just going to guess another customer's ID and then try and access it. So can you see how that's flashed up before the permissions page? So, you know, we're 50% of the way there. We're kind of going to a permissions page, but it actually let the data come into the page first. So again, that needs to be behind a data action, and it needs to do the checking. But if you're not allowed to access that, it should just return empty structures. Okay. And that's it. Thanks very much, everyone. Sorry, I went a little bit over time.
Okay. Thank you so much, Stuart. That was lovely. How's everyone going? Is everyone still here? Can I see some reactions? We're more than halfway through the session. We're almost done, but I just wanted to check in to see how everyone's doing. Hope you're still with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, love all your reactions, guys. And remember, take those notes. We have a Kahoot later, and of course, for your own And again, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. And without further ado, second time I've said it, but Bhavya, take the stage.
Thank you, Julia. And it's going to be a hard act to follow after these two legends, but I'll do my best to continue. Let me share my screen. Hopefully, I've shared the correct screen. All right, awesome. So my topic for today is going to be content security policy, or known as CSP, and I'm really excited to be here and talk about this, because this is such a underdog of a topic, if I may say it that way, and it's usually forgotten about till we get to go live and cyber team is doing their final checks. It's only when and then we start implementing these controls, but really we should really be doing that at from the get-go of a project or environment setup, and I hope after this presentation you feel the same way as well. So let's get to it. What is content security policy, or CSP? So CSP is a security feature that helps prevent certain types of attacks, such as cross-site scripting and other types of injection attacks. This is done by restricting a particular resource or set of resources in a web page from being loaded. So it's essentially a set of rules that you configure in either your app or your environment to dictate where the content can come from, whether it's things like JavaScript, images, style sheets, or any other resources for that matter. So this really reduces the likelihood of any malicious content running in your users' browsers, which is especially critical in applications that handle sensitive information. It's useful in all applications, but particularly for those that handle sensitive information as well. So why is CSP important? So CSP is a critical layer of defense. While secure coding practices can prevent many vulnerabilities, CSP is one of those that provide a safety net. So if for any reason unsafe code was to make it to your application or the server, CSP could still block its execution. So let's take an example. Imagine a scenario where an attacker manages to inject a script into your app. If you have properly configured CSP, you can prevent these scripts from executing, since CSP restricts the domains allowed to run these scripts from your app. So now that we know what is CSP and why it's important, let's look at some of the important CSP directives. What do directive means first of all? So think of CSP directive as traffic rules for your application. They tell the browser which content, like the scripts, styles, and images, is safe to load, and from where it's safe to load as well. So to effectively secure an application, it's essential to understand the core directives that make the big impact on security. So each of these directives that we discuss, each of these directives that we discuss here target a specific type of resources, and these help us really control exactly where different resources are being loaded from. Now, this is not to say that this is an exhaustive list of all the directives that we have, but these are a good starting points, and to set up anything or any sort of configuration. So cool. Let's look at what each of these mean. So starting with the script source. So script source is a directive. It's one of the most important, I would say, in its application. This is what controls what scripts or JavaScripts or any type of scripts can be loaded from an application. Since scripts are often the main vector for malicious attacks, setting the script source limits your application's trusted sources. So where it can come from, for example, it could be your own domain. So you'll see in a next slide we have self. So that means that it's from your own domain, or even a trusted content delivery network or domain if it helps. Then we have object source, which is the directive for plugins. Now, I know plugins are less common today, but they still pose a security risk, especially if they can load from an untrusted content. So by setting object source to none, for example, you can prevent any plugins from being loaded, and this will significantly reduce the risk of any attack. But now, if you do have any specific plugins that your applications do need, it's just a matter of writing down these trusted sources in the configurations, which I'll get to. And I think my camera is frozen, which in that case I might turn it off because I don't like that face of mine. All right. Let's get to the next one, which is the base URI. This is a critical directive because it helps prevent attackers from injecting base tags. And what does that mean? So base tags can change. Having this not set up as a base tag can allow the attacker to be able to change a base tag. That means that for all the relative links on that page, an attacker can set their own base tag, and the relative URLs will point now to their domain or any setup that they've done on their side, and the users will be redirected to those domains. So setting that up is key as well. Then we have the frame ancestors. What is frame ancestors? Frame ancestors directive really control the URLs that are allowed to embed your app using the frame or the embed HTML elements. And I won't go too much into that one because it's unlikely unless we're using something like Power BI, embedded reports. That's when we really need to use those. Image. Now, image is a very common one. This image might seem harmless to start with, but they can actually be used in subtle ways to pose security and privacy risks. For example, an attacker would use images for users tracking by embedding unique image URLs that record when and where they are loaded. This gives the attacker insights into user behavior and potentially even the sensitive information of the user. Similarly, if we have unauthorized images that are loaded onto the application, they could display inappropriate content or even misleading content, which can harm the user experience or even damage the trust that the application has. And this is very important for someone like a bank or a government website, that they're not showing any inappropriate or something that could break the trust of the user. Lastly, we do have style. So style is a directive that controls what style sheets are able to load onto the application. Again, very similar to images, it can break a trust of the user, and also it can be used inappropriately if any manipulation is done there. So now that we understand what kind of directives there are, again, this is not an exhaustive list of all the directives, but something where we can start from. What are the potential values of the directives that we can configure? Starting with self. So self is something that allows to use the only domain that is your domain, so the same origin of that domain the web application is set in. Then we have none. So if you set it as none, it will block all resources of that specified type. And a good example is if we know that we don't have any embedded frames in here, we can set the embedded frames as none, or even plugins for that matter. And that will not allow any type of plugins to be loaded or frames to be loaded onto our application. Then we have unsafe inline. So unsafe, when you configure unsafe inline, it allows JavaScript or CSS to be defined inline with code. Now, often we want to avoid this because it's not good OutSystem practice to have inline CSS or inline JavaScript code. So this is something that's there, but we should really try to avoid this. And same thing with the unsafe eval. Eval is a function for, I think, JavaScript, which is also available in other scripting languages, I believe, as well. But yeah, so this unsafe eval really permits the use of the eval function within scripting. But again, this is something that we want to try reduce the usage of because it's not great practice. And lastly, specifying a specific domain like we have here, which is http://example.com. If we're using something like Google Tags, you could define that domain. Google Tags or Power BI domains that you could define there. Nice. So I think we're ready. We know what the CSV settings do, what is available as directives, and what are the potential values that we have. How do we go and set these up is now the question. So in OutSystems, implementing CSV is very straightforward. CSV headers can actually be added on two levels. This can be done at an environment level or an application level. But not only that, this can also be done through two different sources. We have the availability to do that through Lifetime or even through a Service Center. What OutSystems do advise is that you configure CSV in every environment. Now start with the allowed sources in an environment for all its application. Then specify the sources per application. So what I mean by that is, at an environment level, define what is common that all applications should use. Then if you have the requirement of a specific application that needs a specific configuration to be changed, define those changes at the application level. So this approach follows and allows a balance of security and also flexibility depending on the application that you're using. Okay, so I have talked a lot, but I will switch over to a demo quickly, just in OutSystems through Lifetime and Service Center, how we can show this. Let me just go back and reshare my screen. Awesome. All right. So one thing I do want to show everyone that is here is there are some tools available. Once you have configured those settings that I will show you in a little bit, there are tools available to check if you have sufficient or best practices followed in your CSV configurations. There are tools like CSV Evaluator with google.com. You can put in the configurations in here and click check CSV. That will allow you to see what's missing. Like we said, unsafe inline is not good practice. So that is being flagged here as well, as you can see. There is also a really good one where you plug in just the website URL and it kind of tells you what's missing. So this is powered by Probly. It's a securityheaders.com website. So if you just put in, for example, I've done an example with serviceaustralia.gov.au, and it can show you that content security policies are missing, but this is a government website. But if you go on to mygov.au, which is another government website, and if you do a scan on that, it does have content security policies. Sorry, not there, but here. There we go. But let's switch over to Lifetime, and I'll start with Lifetime first. and go into, whoops, not going to Service Center, but click onto the environment. So we need to click on the environment that we want to configure these settings in. Then you'll see something of this sort, which is more security settings. If you do click on that, that will take you to the security settings of your environment. And then we see a big header called Content Security Policy. If it's not already enabled, just flip the switch over and you will have that enabled. And then as we spoke about some of the directives, you'll see some familiar directives in here, and you can start plugging them in at an individual line. So the first one we spoke about is self. So I can start plugging in self here. For my applications, I know that I'm not going to have any frames, so I can go in here and type in none. Now, once you do save these, it is important at an environment level when you do this, you will need to publish all your applications again to make sure that they are aware of these configurations. So you can do that through solutions as well. And lastly, let's go over to Service Center. So in Service Center, I'll show how this can be done as well. So in Service Center, we can go Administration. And then we have the Security tab available as well. In Security tab, there is the option to do that. I think I'm not logged in with the correct user for now, or I think this is because it's in my personal environment. Personal environments don't allow this in Service Center, but this is where you can do that. It's very similar to how you do it in Lifetime, but that is available. I have forgotten one thing to show everyone, so let's just quickly have a look at how this can be done at an application level as well. I'm going to use SQL Sandbox as an example. So if I go into this application SQL Sandbox, you have settings. If you click on settings, you'll see the content security policies here as well. And similar, if it's off, flick it on, and then you have the configurations or the directives available for input. Awesome. I think that is me. Let me just bring this screen back in here and percent. There we go. I think that is me. Thank you for everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bhavya. Thank you to all our speakers. It's all very interesting and informative, and of course, very relevant to our times now. We have a couple of questions in the chat. I think, Hanno, you addressed the first one, and Stuart as well? Yes.
Yeah, we both did.
Yeah, you both did. We've got a new question from Martha. Who would like to?
Yeah, I think that's related to what I was talking about. Martha, that's a great question. In fact, it's probably both Hannah and I. But yeah, well, that's a decision you have to make. If you do actually duplicate functionality in separate pages, but each of those pages is only for one user, that's actually easier to manage the permissions for. So there's a good reason for doing that. And if you actually, like you're saying, if you've factored those sections out into blocks, then you can move some of that functionality into those those blocks. So and then you reuse them on those screens. So that's kind of fine. That's actually a good way of doing it. If you do decide to do it in a single screen, that's when you have to do all of that extra work to make sure that you're not accidentally letting someone see information that they're not allowed to. Thumbs up from Hanno. Awesome. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. We also have another question. How about CSP via the ODC portal?
That is again a very good question. I haven't had any experience in setting up the content security policy in ODC. It's something I can check and get back to you about.
Awesome. Thank you, Bhavya. So don't go yet, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with us so far. Let's put your knowledge to the test. Let's see how well you paid attention with a quick game. You get a chance to win some bragging rights. And of course, first to third place, get some OutSystems merch. So for those of you who've joined Kahoot before, get the app ready or open the site. Of course, this goes without saying, speakers, unfortunately, you can't join. I mean, you can, but you won't qualify for merch.
I normally join just to answer things wrong. Is that okay if I do that?
Yeah, sure. Yes, that'd be great.
And I say I answer things wrong. I'm actually trying. But
Okay, got the link in the chat, guys. Please join.
Game pin 7322992. Again, top 3 winners will receive a swag gift from OutSystems.
All right, while we wait for other people to join, I think we have another question in the chat. How can we prevent applications from being vulnerable to brute force attacks?
I was just typing the answer. Yeah, OutSystems is great at handling that. You want to, just be aware of the settings. So in OutSystems 11 in the users application, just check out all of the settings in site properties and learn what they are there for. ODC, I'm not sure where all the settings are for that, to be honest. But traditionally, OutSystems is fantastic at that. I know there's a firewall, I think, in ODC that's a little bit more advanced than OutSystems 11. The only reason I know that is we've hit problems where we've had requests that are too big that have been caught by it. So, yeah, you don't really have to do much. It's a lot of it's handled for you.
Thanks, Stu. All right, I think that's everybody. Let's kick off the game. And again, the quicker you answer, the more points you get. First question, what does CSP stand for? Content Security Protocol, Content Security Policy, Cross-Site Prevention, a Cloud Security Program. Okay, most of us got it. Well done, guys. Content Security Policy. Next question. Got Jazz in the lead so far. What's the main purpose of content security policy? Is it to prevent cross-site scripting, speed up website loading times, allow all types of resources from any domain, or track user activity across websites? All right. To prevent cross-site scripting. Oh no, Stuart. Well done, everybody. We've got Lezos in the lead now. Next. Which of the following CSP directives controls where JavaScript can be loaded from? Is it image source, script source, font source, or connect source? Okay, most of you got it as well. From script source, thank you. Wow, we've got Sunil in the lead now. Next, what does the P stand for in OWASP or WASP? Program, project, Parzival, or security? Or for pterodactyl? All right. It is for project.
That was a tricky
Half
one.
the team. Yeah, that was a tricky one. More than half got it. Lezo's still in the lead, followed by Aortman. Next one. Halfway through, what year is the current OWASP top 10? 2024, 2025, 2021, or 1980? I have a feeling about the green one there, about 1980. Okay, correct answer is 2021. Let's see who got it right. Right, A. Ortman is in the lead. Next. What is the acronym for cross-site request forgery? Either CSRF or XSRF, SCFR, XSS, or OASIS? Another tricky one here. Correct answer is either CSRF or XSRF. Let's see who got this right. Jazz is back in the lead now. Thank you. Next question. Name a security area OutSystems handles for us. HTTP, authentication, entity definition, or Gunters? Security level maximum, definitely. All right, authentication, well done.
I'm assuming you answered Gunters, Stuart?
Yeah, I thought that's what it was.
And sees they have come back with 3 in a row, well done. And Aortman's in the lead. Next question, we've got 3 more, sorry. Which one is not a benefit of fine-grained authorization? Flexibility, higher tech debt, increased precision, or enhanced security? Which one is not a benefit? Fine-grained espresso beans, coffee beans. Right, of course, it's higher tech debt. Don't think that's a benefit for anything. Okay, think most of us got this. Still the same scoreboard. It's getting exciting now. 2 more questions. Which one is not a policy language? Is it Cedar, OpenFGA, Ice Cream, or OPA? All right, and of course, ice cream is not a policy language. Got a nice clue there from the picture. Let's see the scoreboard, Marge. Sunil is in the lead, followed by Lesos and MC. It's our top 3 so far. Let's see if the last question will change things. Our very last question, everybody, is which of the following approaches apply to fine-grained authorization? Relational and conditional, rye and whole wheat, conditional logic tree, or relationships and conditions? All right, most of you got it. Relationships and conditions. Well done, everyone. And for the most exciting part, let's see the scores, Marge. And in 3rd place, we have MC. Well done. 2nd place, we have Blazos. And in 1st place, we've got Sunil. Well done. Aortman
Well done.
in 4th place and Viz in 5th. Well done, everybody. Okay, for the top 3, yes, there you go. There's a message there. Please email Margaret so you can get your swag. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining our session. We look forward to having you in our next one. We hope you have a wonderful day and we'll see you soon.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you, Bhavya. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Bhavya. Thank you, Hano. You guys are amazing.
Cheers.
Have a good night,
You're
good
amazing too.
morning, good afternoon. See you all.